Well, good afternoon and welcome to this week's update from myself and the Calder Valley. Um, and welcome to what seems like week 48 of lockdown. The good news, of course, is that the Prime Minister will be updating the nation this week on on what, if any, measures are going to go forward in releasing the lockdown measures that we've currently got, but we'll have to wait and see what happens later on this week. I think, as I reported last week, we had a new announcement from the Chancellor, which was about the bounce back loans, which are for smaller businesses. But I do know that there's a question in on that this week, so I'll leave that. And of course, the other one was a top up to business grants, which basically, if you are in a shared office, a B&B, or an office that you don't pay business rates, but you pay as part of your rent, you can apply to the council from Monday this week for a grant as well, and that's fairly straightforward to do. So without further ado, let's go on to some of the questions. Let me just open the chat page and see what's happening here. No, okay, there we go. And I can see some messages coming in as well. So the first question this week is, hi Craig, I've heard that the government have recently launched these bounce back loans for small businesses. Are these different to the business interruption loans? If so, how? And that's from Daryl. Well, Daryl, I can tell you that the business bounce back loans have been introduced to help smaller businesses impacted by the coronavirus. You can borrow between £2,000 and £50,000. They are 100% government guaranteed. Quite easy to do. You just fill in 7 simple questions, namely online, and there's no interest and no fees or repayments for the first 12 months. What has become evident over the last week, or since these were announced, is that there are only about 8 banks offering these, and they are insisting that you are a business bank customer. There will be more banks accredited by government as time progresses, but currently only the 8 major ones are. So that may cause you a problem if you don't bank with some of the big banks. Now, the business interruption loan, in comparison, was introduced to help smaller to medium-sized businesses. You can borrow up to £5 million with those. They are 80% government guaranteed, with no personal guarantees needed up to the first £250,000. And there's no interest for the first 12 months. So if you're one of the smaller businesses that were quite put off by the larger business interruption loans, the bounce back loans are a really ideal opportunity to help you through the current crisis. What I would say is that you can't apply for the bounce back loan if you already have a business interruption loan. However, if you already receive a loan of up to £50,000 under the interruption loan, and you'd like to transfer it over to the bounce back loans scheme, you can arrange this with your lender up until the 4th of November this year. So I think the rates for smaller businesses in regards to the fees, no payback, interest is a little bit better for the smaller loan. So hopefully, Daryl, that answers your question. So bounce back loans and the business interruption loans can both be accessed via your bank. That. Okay, let me have a look at this. Okay. The second question today is from Jason, and Jason asks, Craig, there has been a lot of talk on social media about people wanting the tips to reopen. Can you put any pressure on Calderdale Council to do this? I'm sure they can do safely. They can do safely reopen them and help decrease the amount of fly tipping in the area. And like I said, that's from Jason. Well, Jason, you're absolutely right, and this is something that we have been pushing back on the council. And indeed, Robert Jenrick only last week had announced that they were sending out some further guidance to local authorities so they can reopen the tips safely. You will have seen in the national press that people like Manchester and others were indeed opening the tips over the weekend, which caused huge amounts of queues. Social distancing was in place, of course, but that process is in place. But you're absolutely right. The council did announce last week that they are restarting collection of garden waste from this week. But it's imperative, particularly when we're at home and we've all done those jobs. I don't know about you guys, but I am sick to death of doing jobs around the house, my jobs lists. Even though I've virtually cleaned every cupboard in the house, Mrs. W seems to want to put an extra job on the list, which inevitably involves a tip. So half of the garage at home currently is ready to go down to our local tip. Unfortunately, we've seen instances where some people have been fly tipping, and clearly that's not acceptable. So it's imperative that Calderdale Council, in line with other councils around the country, start to reopen the tips, but in a safe way that involves social distancing, not just for the people using the tips, but also for those that work at the tips. The council have to ensure that the staff at our local recycling centres are working safely. So that's very, very important. I did see, although I don't know where it's gone, there was a comment on the page here about the burial site or the proposals for the burial site in Soyland. I do know from emails that have been coming into the office and the system that there's a lot of people concerned about the burial site up there. I can assure you that along with many of the residents in Soyland, my office, myself, are putting in a letter of objection to support you up in Soyland as well. But as more details come out about that, then we will, of course, take more of an active role if needed. So that's to answer the question that just came in on the chat board. Another question here. This is from Samantha, and Samantha asks, "Dear Craig, why are car washes still allowed to be open when other businesses that are more have remained closed?" Well, this is a really good question, and one that we've had a few emails into the office about. But car washes weren't on the list initially from government to close because of they are able to social distance when they're working. And in fact, the advice from government very clearly was, unless you're on the list and unless you cannot work from home, and the advice was to strongly work from home wherever possible, then indeed you could still go to work. Car washes are just the same as any other business that are unable to work from home and are not on the list that were closed. And basically, they can social distance whilst they're working. So that's one of the reasons why they are allowed to remain open, unlike pubs, clubs, restaurants, all those types of things, where it is very, very difficult to social distance. In fact, the whole point of going to a pub is to socialise, and that's the reason why pubs and clubs and restaurants, as we all know, have been closed, and why businesses like car washes were and are allowed to remain open, providing, of course, and not just car washes, but any other form of business that is still in operation. They must socially distance whilst, or be able to socially distance whilst working. So I hope that answers your question, Samantha, on those. I've just seen the comment from Louise Smethurst, who again has asked a question about the planning application in Soiland for a graveyard. I think I've already, Louise, answered that question in regards to we will put in a letter of objection along with the majority of people that live in Soiland. Ben asked me this week, when will lockdown be lifted? Well, I suspect, and I think I started off the conversation today on these grounds, Ben, that I suspect, but I genuinely don't know, that the government will implement a phased lift of the lockdown measures, but it will be phased because the aim of doing anything in regards to lifting lockdown will be to make sure that we don't have a second spike. I think it's fairly clear from the stats coming out each day now that the R, as they call it, is now below 1, and they will be wanting to keep it that way. That's the infection rate, and they will be taking all those things into account, as well as taking all the advice from the scientists, the chief medical officer, and making sure that any phased lifting of lockdown will happen with the sole aim of making sure that R level remains below 1, so we don't get a second spike. So we'll have to wait and see what the next update is from the Prime Minister, which apparently is happening this Sunday. And we'll all know more about that. But it is important to stay safe. The lockdown is intended to make sure that the pressure on our NHS is kept at a level where they can cope. And of course, the whole idea is by lockdown is to make sure that people are safe and not unnecessarily contracting the virus. So any phasing of the lockdown or coming out of lockdown will bear all those things in mind whilst they're doing it. So I hope that answers your question, Ben. But we'll wait and see what happens on Sunday when the Prime Minister gives us our 3 weekly update rather. Okay, Janet writes in this week and asks, "Hi Craig, I've been turned down for the business grant because I'm not eligible. What other support is available to me?" Well, clearly, Janet, I don't know why you've been turned down for the business grant because you haven't given me any more details than that. But basically, with the business grants, if you are a business that is in receipt of the your rateable value is below £15,000, and you're in receipt of the small business rate relief, and you're a business rate payer, even if that's zero, you have a business rate account, you should be entitled to one of those grants. And I do know, as I reported last week, there was still quite a lot of businesses that haven't yet applied for that £10,000 grant. If you are involved in the leisure business, retailing pubs that's over £15,000, there is a grant of £25,000 available to you. And similar type of criteria with that. But Janet, you haven't told me why you were rejected. But if you want to drop me some more details via my parliamentary email account, which is craig.whittaker.mp@parliament.uk, with some more details, I'll get one of the team to have a look into that for you. One of the other things that I would say to you is that, there isn't just grants available. There are lots of other things that are available to businesses. There is a plethora, a massive package of support from the Chancellor. Things like, of course, the furlough scheme. We saw yesterday on the news that over 6 million people are furloughed in this country. So that's a massive help to businesses to keep skill set into the business for when they come out of this. Also saves people being laid off. There's also the business rate relief if you're over £15,000 in rateable value. There is those business rate relief for you. There's also the VAT deferral until the start of the next financial year. The only caution I would say to people about this, of course, is that it's okay deferring, but it still has to be paid. So just be wary that you're not racking up further problems for your business down the line. Of course, if you are or you employ self-employed people to do various things for you, or if you're running a business and you are self-employed, there is a self-employed scheme which comes out and starts to pay out next month. So that's important as well. And as I previously mentioned earlier, there's the business bounce back loans if you're a small business, and also the business interruption loans as well. So, like I said, quite a plethora of things to do with helping, and are designed to give you several tools in your armory as a business for this unprecedented situation that we're currently in. So, Janet, send me some details of why you were rejected for the grant, and we'll look into that for you. And also have a look at or Google business support for, government support for businesses during COVID-19. And there is a list on there with some criteria that may help you out as well. I've got a question here from Hugh, who's asking, can you supply, let me have a look, can you supply information regarding Brighouse road problems, for example, the roadworks at and around the two bridges? How long will the work take? Hugh, I haven't got a clue as to how long that work will take. That is primarily Calder Council. But I will get my, as I've said on here before, I do employ councillors in my office, both Howard, Blackburn and Sophie Whittaker, who both are local councillors, and I'll get them on to trying to find the information. So if you send me an email, Hugh, with that question, I'll get the guys to get some definitive answers for you, and we'll come back to you on that as well. In fact, if I'd have scrolled down earlier, Sophie has already come back and replied to Hugh on here and says Restrict Bridge, that's the one down here at Bridgend, is closed due to a large crack found on the underside of the bridge, making it structurally unsafe. There is no update from Highways as to how long it will be closed for, but they were doing a full site visit last week. So suspect we may hear more about the time scales too. And she's asked, which other bridge are you referring to, Hugh? I presume you're talking about the road down at Elland Bottom, which has been closed due to a massive crack in it after the floods. I do know that's going to take at least a year before that's opened. But if you come back to us with some other, we'll see if we can get some answers on those for you. But similarly, if you continue and send in an email with that question, I'll make sure we get a definitive answer sent back to you, Hugh. Thanks very much. I'll take another question from what's been emailed in this week. A little coffee first, if that's okay. And this one comes from Yvonne. Dear Craig, will there be further support for businesses if the lockdown is to continue longer than expected? I'm worried that my pub will never reopen, as the grant, which I'm thankful to have received, will not last long, from Yvonne. Yvonne, I can't tell you for certain how long pubs will be closed. I suspect, and I only suspect, that pubs will be one of the last to come out of lockdown because of the nature of pubs, but that's only me suspecting. That decision's way above my pay grade. But of course, the Prime Minister and the whole Cabinet will be taking notice of what the scientific and medical advice will be. But what I will say to you is that the grants that have been issued, as with furlough, have been initially for 3 months. We've seen already that the Chancellor has extended furlough for a further month. I dare say he, speaking to the Chancellor on a fairly regular basis, I will say to you that he is very conscious of the fact of the hardship that businesses like pubs are going through, and he will keep all of this under review. And it's a little bit like the plan. People ask me all the time about what is the government's plan to come out of lockdown. Well, I suspect there won't be a single plan. There'll be a multitude of scenarios because of the nature of what we're dealing with. We'll probably get, well, okay, if this happens, A will happen. If B happens, C will happen. So a bit of it more like a roadmap rather than one single plan. So, and pubs, restaurants, events, theatres, all those types of places will be within that roadmap. We'll wait and see. What I would say to you is that the signs are looking good. We've definitely come through the curve, as the Prime Minister said to us last week, and it's important that we don't cause that second spike. And pubs, restaurants, clubs, all those types of places where people go out and socialise will be critical to keeping the infection rate down. So let's wait and see. I can tell you that not only the Chancellor, but all of the Cabinet are fully aware of the consequences of a prolonged lockdown from the economic point of view, and they are taking all those things into consideration when they make announcements. But let's wait and see what happens this week. I think that's all the questions we've had in so far this week. I'll just have a look to see if there's any more on the scroll. No, there's not, and that's all I've got. So thank you very much for listening in, and thank you for adhering to government advice. It's important that we do take care and take into account the advice and the instruction that government has given about lockdown, and that is to stay at home, stay safe, and not only protect lives but also protect our NHS as well. That's most important. So until this time next week, I think that's all we have now. So thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you.